The next talk is something pretty special to me. This is the return to BAA meetings of a person that many of you will know from the past, Martin Mobberley. I met Martin first time back in 1982 or 1?
81.
81. And I've known Martin all that time. He was a real inspiration to me when I was initially getting into imaging comets. And more recently, Martin has been doing remote imaging, but I know that you're in the process of setting up your own observatory back in Suffolk as well. So Martin's going to talk to us now about remote imaging of comets, 16 years of experiences. Over to you, Martin. Thank you.
Right. I presume it's the right and left that operate the...
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
The one on the top is the laser.
Yeah. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, remote imaging in comets, 16 years experiences, good and bad, mostly good, but some very frustrating experiences. For anyone who's old as me and remembers reasons not to be cheerful, there are plenty of reasons not to be cheerful when it comes to observing comets from the UK. The UK is often cloudy for good comets. Now, cloud you can cope with in as much as you know you can stay in bed, but sometimes the cloud comes and goes, you don't know if you should go out, it's hazy, which is even worse. That's very frustrating. I am not in my 20s anymore, as you will have noticed. Getting up at 3 a.m, pushing a shed back when it's minus 10 degrees or whatever, and the rails are covered in snow, not much fun. Light pollution is getting worse. Then there's the UK summer twilight. Comets like Neowise, for instance, came along, and that was, of course, in summer twilight. A lack of sleep is another one. I badly need my beauty sleep, as you can see. And there's light pollution even where I live, in the depths of West Suffolk. This is where I live, and where it says MM, that's my house, 6 miles south of Bury St Edmunds. But about 10 years ago, 500 yards away, Hewick's Haulage decided to set up a floodlit lorry park. So in that direction, the sky is now like Las Vegas, especially if there's lots of lorries coming and going. But in 2001, this is about 8 years before I started remote imaging, a chap set up Global Rentoscope. Originally in New Mexico, this consisted of mainly Celestron 14s and Takahashi astrographs. This was the chap, that's the chap on the right. Now, he claimed this thing on the left was his dog. Now, I assumed that a grizzly bear had photobombed the shot, but no, he claimed it was his dog. God only knows what it cost him in pedigree chump to feed that thing. But Arnie Rosner set up iTelescope, and he was a Sears, that's an American company, Sears washing machine engineer. And he set up iTelescope, remote imaging from New Mexico. And then this was brought up by a chap whose name was only Aussie Pete, who was an Australian, of course. At that point, things started to deteriorate a bit, and I wondered if this organisation was being run by another man and his dog. But things improved quite dramatically. Something I'd like to stress here, you do not need long, deep sky exposures to take a great image of a comet. You see people using remote telescopes accumulating hundreds and hundreds of hours of exposures on deep sky comets just to get the background smoother. For bright comets, there's no need to do this. Bright comets are as bright in terms of surface brightness as the brightest Messier objects for M31, M42, because they're so close to the sun. So you only need a short exposure, which means you can do remote imaging fairly cheaply, as long as you can pay the monthly sub of a minimum of about $40 a month. This was my very first ever remote comet image in 2009, Comet 2007 N3 Lunin. I was actually at the dentist when this picture was taken. And when I came back from the dentist, 2 pictures were waiting, which showed that the tail had disconnected in that period. And there was a phone call waiting for me from another man called Dudley Fuller, which is another story on its own. Now, The next one that really convinced me that comet imaging remotely was a good idea, this is Comet 2009 R1 McNaught. McNaught, of course, famous Scottish comet discoverer. This was a picture I took remotely with a 10-inch Takahashi back in 2010. And about 10 days later, I took this grotty image of the same comet with a similarly fast instrument from deepest Suffolk. A far poorer image. And I realized that being at altitude in a jet black sky was the way to go. Now, in January 2013, iTelescope, courtesy of Aussie Pete, opened a new observatory costing multi-millions of dollars in Siding Spring Observatory. And this was really exciting because up to now I hadn't been able to image anything in the Southern Hemisphere, at least not that far south. And they just completed this observatory when this happened. There was a bushfire at Siding Spring. 53 homes were destroyed. Everything went quiet. And horrified, I thought, did that mean that the entire brand new iTelescope observatory had been destroyed? Because there was nothing coming out of it at all. And I was hearing all kinds of horrible stories. This is Rob McNaught himself with his partner on the left, with his home before the fire. On the right, standing in front of the remains of his home. Just one of 53 homes destroyed. Still nothing from Siding Spring. Had the facility been destroyed? Well, no, it hadn't. And I think I was the first person to take a remote image of a comet from the Siding Spring facility, and it completely blew me away, because this comet was only about magnitude 6 or 7 at the time. It was right close to the celestial pole, and the picture just blew me away. I thought, wow, I wasn't expecting that. I then went on to take many, many more images with iTelescope, both at the New Mexico site and the Siding Spring site, one or two from Chile as well. So this is Pan-STARRS, this is Comet Lovejoy. Terry Lovejoy somehow managed to discover with an 8-inch celestron many, many comets which had a fantastic gas tail, really loads of detail in the tails. This was 2012 K1 Pan-STARRS, again, imaged via iTelescope. All these pictures are either 2 or 3 minute exposures. So you don't have to allow for the comet's motion. It's very simple to do, and in mono you've got plenty of signal to noise. This is Michael Jaeger, who many regard as being the best comet photographer and imager over the past 50 years, observing from Austria. And as he says, bright comets should never be exposed for more than 20 minutes if you want to capture the true nature of the object, because as we've already seen today, ion tails change their appearance in just minutes. And to me, the best pictures I ever managed to obtain were another one of Terry Lovejoy's comets, 2014 Q2 Lovejoy. This comet wasn't that close to the sun. It was about 1.3 AU from the sun, but that meant it was away from the twilight and was in a very dark black sky. And the intricate detail in the tail of this comet as it changed over hours and days was quite something. And this, again, was just a 3-minute exposure with a Takahashi, that's about a 4-inch f5 refractor, an APO. Now, this picture was taken with a 20-inch telescope just hours after that previous telescope. You'll notice, if I go back, that the previous image with a small telescope, 4-inch aperture, hardly shows any more detail in the tail than this mosaic of 2 images with a 20-inch. It shows plenty of fainter stars, stars that are maybe magnitude 20, 21, no more detail in the comet's tail. This is another image of Comet Lovejoy, the same comet with the same fantastic gas tail, plenty of stuff going on. And again on January 21st, 2015, where we see the comet still very active despite not being that close to the sun. And another one on January 24th. As I say, 3-minute exposures, 2-minute exposures, you don't have to allow for the comet moving, and they're cheap to take. And this comet just kept on giving and giving. But sometimes I do colour, but even then I stick to short exposures. This is an LRGB, 3 minutes of L, and RGB, 1 minute each. And they also have a RASA at New Mexico, which I'll mention later on. This is a 4x2 minute exposure, of 2017 T2 Pan-STARRS taken 5 years ago, and another comet 2020 F8 Swan. Sometimes I just do pretty pictures because there's a comet passing next to a very bright star. In this occasion, the small green dot there is within the sort of halo of Bellatrix, which you'll know is the bright star in Orion. And of course, other targets are comets passing close to Messier objects, which are always a treat for people to get images of if they've got a wide enough field. And this was Messier 3 and comet 2020 A1 Leonard past Messier 3 2021 December 3rd. And you'll quite possibly see pictures that people take of comets going over maybe 30, 40, 50 minutes. They'll do an extremely complicated system where they they remove the comet from the image, stack the star images separately, then remove the stars from the image, stack the comet separately using PixInsight or some other type of software, churning through absolute gigabytes of data. But in fact, you can just get away with a snapshot in many occasions. So, what are the telescopes that I'm using to obtain these pictures? Well, while they're mounted on quite expensive mounts, telescopes themselves are fairly modest. This is one I've used a lot, telescope T14, FSQ 106, that's a Takahashi 106mm aperture f5.3 astrograph. You can't actually buy them anymore, there are plenty of equivalents. And it costs just $3 for a 2-minute exposure from a dark site. You do, though, have to have a minimum with ITEL a subscription of $40 a month. And you may say, well, I can't afford $40 a month, but I think that's fairly cheap compared to 2 nights in an Edinburgh hotel, at least according to my current bank balance. Now, I took this image with that particular Takahashi. This is just a 60-second image. And here's something that's a bit of a mystery with ITEL, which I'll mention in a few minutes' time. I shouldn't have been able to take this picture because at the time, the comet was in twilight and it was only 14 degrees above the observatory horizon. And all the data said, this telescope will not allow you to work for anything below 15 degrees. The software won't let you do it. I have since found out that pretty much all the information on the wall heights and software limits of ITEL telescopes is fiction, because I did take that picture when the comet was only 14 degrees high. And the yellow line here indicates the 15-degree height at the time. The roof closes when the sun is 10 degrees below the horizon. So you have this sort of window, as you often do with comets, a battle between altitude and twilight, made more complicated by the fact that when you're using an online telescope, it's churning through things like focusing, slewing, and all sorts of things, eating up the minutes while you're waiting for the exposure to be taken. And this is another picture I took this time last year, Sushinshan Atlas. Again, just a 2-minute exposure, showing the anti-tail that Nick showed in his talk as well, where he visited La Palma. There is also another reason to stick to short exposures, and a reason which Nick has also mentioned this evening. This was the same comet, Sushinshan Atlas, taken on August 1st, 2024, by one of the world's best comet photographers, Rolando Ligustri. This was a 20-minute exposure. The comet was in twilight, which is, of course, when we get these trails, because the satellites are not in the Earth's shadow. They can see the sun, and therefore you get all these wretched Starlink satellites, courtesy of Mr. Musk. Now, what are the telescopes that are available? Well, you can also hire time on big telescopes, which are useful if you're going for smaller, faint comets, and they're not that expensive if you only use 2-minute exposures either. For instance, a 20-inch CDK will cost you about $5 for 2 minutes. Another Takahashi, $3 for 2 minutes. Believe it or not, the RASA at New Mexico, or rather Utah, because they've since moved, the RASA is free. Yes, it's free. But of course, there's a catch. You still have to have a subscription, And it's first come, first served. So everybody is trying to log on to this telescope all the time. It's used very heavily, often breaks down. And if you do manage to get on it, you're only allowed 33 minutes every month. There's also another 20-inch on a big Planewave L500 mount, $10 for 2 minutes. And this particular instrument, this is quite a beauty, this one. I've used this in the last few days on Comet Lemon. In fact, since I started using this on Comet Lemon, every man and his dog has started using it on Comet Lemon. And so there are pictures by me and there are pictures of other people 2 minutes before and 10 minutes before that. This telescope is worth about $100,000, but it costs $354 an hour to rent. But if you're only using it for 2 minutes, it only costs you $12. So I think that's pretty good to be able to use a telescope with this big an aperture. Actually, I say big an aperture, it's a 20-inch f3, but the size of the secondary mirror is so huge, it's really equivalent to a 16-inch f4. And I used that recently, a couple of months ago, when Comet Lemon was starting to brighten. There's also another instrument here, which I know Nick has used a few times, 135mm lens. It looks a bit silly sitting on that paramount, but it has a very low horizon and an extremely wide field of view. And a similar sort of instrument with a 500mm focal length, Takahashi E180 in Chile, also a very low horizon, $4 for 2 minutes. This instrument is an absolute bargain. This is an original instrument from the time when Arnie Rosner and his giant hound set up Global Rentoscope in 2001. This Takahashi 10-inch f3.4 has been operating for the past 24 years and is still going strong. And it only costs $2 for a 2-minute exposure. And then the comet we've heard about, 3I Atlas. There are some people who appear to be unhinged, who should know better on the internet, claiming that this is something resembling the Borg mothership. No, it's an interstellar comet. So what do you see when you go onto iTelescope? This is what you're presented with, a list of all the sites. Quite often they'll say some telescopes are offline or the roof is closed due to cloud, but that's what you get, a whole presentation of telescopes. You've got an area where you can plan your observations ahead in advance, up to maybe 10 hours of reservations ahead, depending on which tariff you're on. And then you get a map showing you the time and days and where your reservations are. And my reservations on this particular map are the brown strips across the top, and the green ones are other people who are trying to also muscle in on any comet or object that's popular at the time. And then you get a list of all your reservation summaries, and it tells you in the bottom right what your total summary reservation is. There's also a comet imaging instruction, but since Mr. Musk gave us all his satellites, I never used this. This can be used to do very long exposures where you just track on the comet, so the stars appear as streaks and the comet is frozen. Now, with all the satellites flying around, I tend to just do 60-second or 2-minute exposures these days, so you can stack them and remove the trails. So I don't generally use this. Another problem with imaging comets remotely is, unlike with your own equipment, you don't really know exactly where the tail is going to be in advance, and you can't shift the comet around before you take the picture if you see the tail heading off the edge of the frame. So you have to plan meticulously ahead to try and work out where the comet's tail is going to be, because ideally you want the comet's head in one corner and the tail stretching across the image. So I use Guide 9, and you can see here the sort of pinkish purplish image of the comet and where Guide thinks the comet's tail is going to be and how long it's going to be, which is usually fairly accurate. But this only tells you where the gas tail is going to be. This only tells you where the tail that is pointing opposite the sun in the sky is going to be. Doesn't tell you where any dust tails are going to be or any anti-tails, which Dennis is going to be talking about later. Doesn't tell you where they're going to be. So you really need to look at what pictures people have taken of comets in the days before to guess where the other tails might be. and what the comet is doing. Okay, so far I've just been talking about good things with imaging remotely, but there are plenty of bad things, and I would say they're more incredible frustrations rather than bad. They have you tearing your hair out. Equipment failures and high walls. The dreaded software upgrades. I mean, we get enough of these things from Windows, let alone anyone else. But as soon as somebody does an upgrade, whether it's Microsoft, iTelescope, or your bank, something goes wrong. Then telescopes booked solid. As soon as there's a decent comet, you'll suddenly find out there's no space. Out of focus image, rubbish flat fields. Server failures and hacker paranoia. On several occasions I tried to log on to ITEL and it says, "You are a hacker, we don't want your type, go away." No explanation at all. And then after a few hours it clears. And of course we've also got the dreaded climate change. And the only browser that works perfectly with iTelescope is Firefox. They've admitted this for about the past 10 years. They don't know why, but it's the only one that works perfectly. One of my biggest frustrations was back in 2021 December. I'd booked a whole load of slots for this comet, 2022 E3 ZTF. So this was taken on New Year's Eve 2022. And when you've made a whole load of reservations weeks ahead and you've worked them all out and planned them, the last thing you want is total cloud. But this was worse than total cloud. That was the last image I was able to get this comet for about 6 weeks. Because what did iTelescope do? They decided to move. They moved all their telescopes, millions of dollars worth, from New Mexico up to Utah desert, because the owner of the New Mexico site had died. There was talk about the site might be sold. It was going to cost a lot more. So they just up-sticked and didn't tell anybody. They moved 600 miles to a new site in the Utah desert, positioned 135 miles northeast of Las Vegas, because that's how far away you need to be from Las Vegas that it doesn't interfere. 6 weeks later, after all my reservations were thrown in the bin, because the telescopes weren't even on their tripods, weren't even on their plinths, I got another image of this comet. So that, as you can imagine, was incredibly frustrating. But the new site in the Utah desert is superior. What about equipment failures? Well, you might think, oh, plane wave mount, plane wave telescope, top-notch filter wheels, nothing can possibly go wrong. You've got to remember these telescopes now have been operating for more than 10 years. They've probably accumulated about 1,000 hours of exposure time. Even they are starting to fall apart. Filter wheels, focusers, cameras, drives, they all pack up however much they cost. But at least you don't have to fix them. You don't have to battle with the software. They have to do it. I've now just put a snapshot of emails I've had from my telescope over the last few years. I'm going to rattle through these just to show the sort of number of messages I've had. The standard reply now is our apologies for the poor experience. Then there's the fact that sometimes the telescope spends forever and ever trying to focus or slew and thinks something is wrong. And you're waiting until you can take an image of a comet, and then suddenly it's too late because either the comet is set too low or it's twilight and the roof is set, simply because the telescope is trying to work out something and the software is going into a loop. I find this incredible. Apparently, all these telescopes, iTelescope, they have to manually change the clocks to daylight saving time. Now you can imagine the hell this causes when you're photographing comets in twilight, either in the morning or the evening. You're either going to end up with a comet trying to be photographed in daylight or when it's below the wall of the horizon. But no, they have to change the clocks manually. And I told them the clocks were wrong. They hadn't realized. I've already mentioned wall height confusion. What they say the minimum wall height is just fiction. And also, occasionally, they will move a telescope from one part of the observatory to another where the wall height is different, and they won't alter the software. So they haven't even realized this happens. They don't seem to understand comet observers. If it's dead overhead, fair enough. An hour or so difference doesn't make any difference, and the wall height is irrelevant. About once a month on a Sunday, some kind of server upgrade, the server crashes. You can't get in contact with it. Then there was the huge kerfuffle about a year ago. I'm amazed by this email where Mr. Dudgich says, unfortunately, most of our old system was broken and held together with code patches and unstable software. That's an admission. And you're paying money to these people. This was because I'd complained that the new system was very flaky. And he said, but the old system was broken and held together with code patches and unstable software. The new system will be much, much better. Well, they battled with the new system for months and then decided to take my advice, which is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Then you get uploads that take forever, that you expect an image to download in seconds or minutes, and it takes like hours and locks up. Again, our apologies for the continuing issues. Some of the telescopes, they just come up when you're going to use them with a resetting, which is supposed to happen when a run has finished, and then it shuts down, reboots, and somebody else's reservation takes over. Sometimes it says telescope resetting, and it stays like that, not only for hours, but for the whole night, so nobody else can use it, because there appears to be nobody in the observatory at night. They're all home at sleep, getting their beauty sleep. And then another one, they changed all the folder names. For some reason, they were completely baffled by their folders, which said things like T32, T30 in lowercase. They suddenly didn't work, so they had to rename them all in uppercase so that the images would go in the right place. And then something which I think has affected the BAA recently, this one, how do I cancel my subscription? At the bottom in red it says all points are valid for 1 year following the end of your current subscription. So you might think, great, so I can leave ITEL, not pay a subscription, and my hundreds of dollars of points are still available for me to use. But no, because if you read the upper line in red, in order to use any accumulated points, you're required to have an active paid-up subscription. So if you stop paying ITEL your monthly subscription, you'll have all these dollars and dollars that you haven't used, but you can't use them, despite the fact they're still in the system. You have to rejoin to use them. And I believe somebody recently offered the BAA thousands of dollars in unused points, and we couldn't use them because he had to restart his subscription again for us to use them. Oh, this one, flat fields from hell. I mean, I had a look at the flat fields and dark frames are deducted automatically, but sometimes the image is so grotty you feel you just have to look at what they look like, and I had to look at some of them. And it looked like somebody had vomited over the filter wheel, to be honest. Like, I don't know, maybe they never clean these things. They seem to use the flat fields for months. Oh, and then the autofocus are getting in a loop, getting totally stuck. And you're told at the end, image is focused, and you get that as an image. Pinpoint sharp, focusing has completed. But I would like to say, in case this meeting is being recorded and ITEL are going to watch it and sue me, I would say that despite all the frustrations, ITEL has enabled me to take hundreds of high-quality comet images I could never have obtained from the UK in the last 16 years. But in closing, I would also say that I am only familiar with ITEL. There are other providers. There's the Alnitak, which the BAA uses, and I know Dennis Brzezinski is used quite regularly. There's SLU, which, for instance, Gary Poynter uses for variable stars when it's cloudy. There's Chilescope. They have some impressive equipment, but their big 20-inch f3.6 Newtonians are all in observatories that have a maximum observatory wall height of 30 degrees, which isn't a lot of good for comets. But they also have this very nice Riccardi Honda's 8-inch f3 system. So, they are an alternative. Another alternative is putting your equipment somewhere like Spain, which is what Peter Carson has done. This is his system in Spain at the EI facility. And recently in our journal, there was a report by Mazin Younis in Morocco, who's got some very friendly locals in Morocco to set up his own system so he can take images from the UK using this telescope in Morocco. And that was in the journal about a year or so ago. And the other option to escape cloud and light pollution is our section director's solution. This is Nick's solution. Head off to the dark skies of La Palma with a ZWIM3, a RedCat 51 and a 2600 MC camera, all fairly lightweight. And I'll conclude there. So thank you very much.
Not La Palma.
No, that's Tavistock Road, Chelmsford, apparently.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was really good.
Questions or not?
Yeah, I think so. Plan is that we'll restart at 1:45 after lunch. And we've got Dennis Brzezinski talking about anti-tails, so you certainly don't want to miss that. So we have got a reasonable amount of time for lunch, and we're running a little bit late. But let's just take one or two questions and then head off to lunch. If anyone wants any recommendations as to where to eat, there are some on the sheet here you can come up and have a look at. But there's loads and loads of places around. You're welcome to just go out, get some sandwiches and bring them back. And eat them here, and I'll be around and some of the other speakers will be around if you want to ask us questions then. But okay, just a quickly question for Martin. So I'm trying to spread this around a bit. So Jeremy first.
Thanks, Martin.
Hang on a second, Jeremy.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Martin. On ITEL, you mentioned a lot of people are imaging the same object. Do you have access to those images, to other people's images?
No.
If you want to measure other things in them?
But in a lot of cases, I know the people who use. I mean, for instance, I used that big plane wave about a week or so ago, and Ian Sharp, who's also a BA member, then started using the same image, and the images are on our gallery. So quite often, images that people take on ITEL end up on the BAA gallery anyway, but people who are unknown to me, foreign members, who obscure their username. I mean, my username is Mobberley, so they know who I am. But there are some people who use the telescopes, and I haven't got a clue because they don't use their real name. Sorry?
I'm Fancy Speeder, which isn't also.
Ah, right.
Thanks, Martin. That was an amazing talk. It's just a point that there's a NASA telescope that I've used. It's totally free to use, and I imaged the Dumbbell Nebula. And you just go onto it and you pick what you want, and then about 3 days later, I got an email, and it's got all this stuff with different, filters and stuff to do. And I want to try that again. You've encouraged me to do it.
Right.
And of course, the society here, the Astronomical Society of Edinburgh, have their own telescope set up in Spain, and we've had some really impressive comet images taken by that. You mentioned Alnitak. That's a telescope that was set up by a guy called Maxim Yusutov, and he's donated time on that telescope to the BAA, which Dennis has been using really well for comet imaging. But if any other BAA members are interested in using that telescope, then just contact me, and I can sort out things for that. So thank you very much, Martin. Really good stuff. I'm looking forward, though, to seeing the results from your observatory in Suffolk, even with that lorry park 500 yards away. Okay.